This episode of Conversations with a Liberal is brought to you by the Snortlings Hollow Etsy shop. Each handmade, one-of-a-kind dollhouse is a work of art. So, buy a little piece of Snortlings Hollow for your very own. I also sell custom-made Snortlings, and Etsy offers a payment plan. So check it out. And now, let's welcome my friend, James LaCroix. Hi, James. I'm really glad to see you.
Likewise.
Well, I just wanted everyone to know who's watching the show that this is not going to be one of my regular episodes. This is just an informal chat with James. So we're going to talk about some of the topics of today. We're completely unscripted. I haven't even taken any notes. I have like a small little list of topics. That's it.
Yeah.
But we don't even have to stick to it. We're just going to talk about whatever we want. And I want everyone to know that James is a liberal and I'm a conservative.
Yep.
And that we actually get along. We talk like regular people. We don't hate each other.
We don't call each other names.
No, and it's possible. We talk all the time. We're actually really good friends, internet friends. You know, we live in separate parts of the
you do live across the country from me, but maybe someday.
Yeah, but in the same time zone.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Kind of cool that we're on the same time. So
For sure.
I don't know. Let's just start talking casually.
Okay,
How are
sounds
you,
good.
James?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
I'm doing good.
Nice. I like your wig.
You like my wig?
Yeah, it's
Is that what
pretty.
you said? Oh, thank you so
I like
much.
it.
I wake up looking like this, you know.
I know. That's like because I dyed my hair kind of purple, but I want like a lighter lavender shade, like kind of like that more, but to get other dye, I guess.
Well, you look cute.
Thank you.
What does your shirt say?
It's a Stardew Valley shirt, but it's like a heavy metal version, which is kind of funny because like Stardew Valley is not metal. It's like, like a little farming simulator. So.
Oh, okay.
My sister got it for me, so.
That's kind of cool. I like that.
She knows my taste pretty well.
All right. So as not to get too boring, let's just start with some of these topics right here. I wrote down a couple of things that I know I discussed like a couple of things with you, like, hey, let's talk about this and that, but I haven't done any research or anything. We're not trying to own each other here or, like murder each other with facts or anything. So we're just going to see like the different points of view.
Yeah, for sure.
One might have over the other. And what I have down here is gun control and gun rights. We're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk a little bit about immigration, and James says that he's not real, big into the immigration. Like he doesn't have a lot of opinions on immigration, right? Like, you haven't really been thinking about it.
I did read up on it a little bit. Like I wouldn't say like I did full-blown research, but I was like, I want to at least form a slightly more solid opinion if we're going to talk about it. And I'm still definitely like a fence sitter on a lot of things. But I can at least present like both sides of the things that I've heard and experienced, and likewise for you, obviously. So.
Yeah. Okay, that was another one. I wanted to go in a little bit about like COVID and the restrictions, the masking and stuff. It does kind of fit in with the immigration thing because from what I've heard, they're letting quite a few immigrants over the border right now. Like they're doing the catch and release thing, and several, maybe a few hundred of them so far have been known to be carrying COVID. And so that's considering the fact that I live in Texas, and that's where they're letting people into my state, It's a concern for me. So I think that COVID is one of your hot button topics, right? Okay. And you said maybe you didn't want to get too into it because we might, get in a heated debate about it or something.
I can just be honest, like about what I don't want to talk about. Like I don't really want to talk about conspiracy theories with it. I don't want to talk about whether or not it's a real problem. And like the overall like sort of mandates in the country necessarily. Like we can talk about like border mandates, but like all of that stuff really does it's a hot button issue for me because it's destroyed my life, and I get really upset about.
Do you want to touch on that at all? Because we do speak fairly regularly, through chat, Discord and whatnot, but you haven't really told me how COVID has destroyed your life. So
well,
do you want to talk about that? Is that a sensitive subject?
I don't know. It's like, it's not like necessarily that it's like sensitive. It's just that when I don't think you're one of these people. From what I can tell, it seems like you take it fairly seriously. But there's a lot of people who don't, and a lot of people who don't believe it's like a real thing, and a lot of people who refuse to like follow the guidelines that would make it go away faster. And because of that, it's dragging out longer and longer. And so the negative impacts that it's had on my life are being prolonged longer and longer. Specifically that my job used to be, before all of this happened, going to conventions around the country and selling artwork, which was like, I loved doing it. It was like my reason for living. And it was like, I was the most happy when I was able to do that. And now I can't anymore because we can't have any large gatherings, and we won't be able to have any large gatherings until like, you know, the cases are under control, and that's never going to happen if people don't take it seriously. So like, that's where it makes me very like angry at certain kinds of people. So if I get into that, like, somebody's going to get offended probably, and maybe not you or me, but somebody in the comments probably at least.
Well, if anyone watching this show is really concerned about being offended, maybe they should watch something else, you know?
Probably true, yeah. And I try to like I don't really, it's not that I care if I offend people necessarily, but there's like certain points where it's like, I will get more vitriolic about certain topics and I don't really want to go there. So, you know.
Okay. Another thing that I wanted to touch on today, I guess I'm just kind of going through the list and then we'll just start on one of them, but like the critical race theory topic that's happening right now. Do you have strong views, opinions, things on that?
I do, but probably closer to the things that you also think are true. So I wouldn't say that my strong views on that are necessarily in opposition to you. The thing is, as a liberal, I do know a lot about race theory that is true, like valid to discuss. But I'm guessing you probably like feel this way as well, but I feel like it's like kind of gotten too far, especially in like college and like secondary education, where it's become like such a focus that it's become very divisive, in my opinion.
Yes, like, my opinion too.
Yeah, sure. I feel like it's just spawning more and more race wars more than anything.
Yes, absolutely.
I remember back in the 90s, I feel like there were like the race relations were way better than they are now.
Yes, exactly. We have the same opinion on this. There you go.
Also, like, I'm older than a lot of people these days. Like, a lot of these people are like 14, 15, and then like maybe early 20s, and like they don't really remember, I guess, how it used to be. So I don't know, maybe
that. I guess you're old enough to remember the 90s, huh?
Right. A lot of them also are like really suburban white people, and so they've never lived in like a minority neighborhood, which I have most of my life. And which I can also talk a little bit about that because Milwaukee is unique in that way. But because of that,
let's just start talking about this topic. We're not going to like read it. We'll start our conversation right here. Yeah,
for sure. So I live in Milwaukee, which is, and I don't really mind saying that, it's a big enough city. It's known for being one of the most, if not the most, segregated cities in the entire country. So what's really interesting about the city is that like you will have neighborhoods that is like 95% black people, and then like a street over, it's like the beginning of the white neighborhood. So it's like, it's literally like block by block. And this is, a lot of it is because of redlining, which is another thing I could talk about, which is like a race theory that is true. And then there's also like, we have an entire district that's mostly Latino, and we have like a Jewish district. Like we just literally like are extremely segregated. But I used to live in the neighborhoods that were predominantly black people for most of my life, just because I'm very poor, and that's usually the low income neighborhood, unfortunately. And the thing is that I noticed there's a big difference when it comes to like talking about racial issues between white people who grew up in the suburbs and have never lived in a low income neighborhood, and white people that have lived in neighborhoods that like have a lot of minority populations, which is that like a lot of these people in these neighborhoods, they don't really give a shit about your like microaggressions or like whether or not you're wearing dreadlocks and like all that kind of stuff. Like that's not really the issue they're concerned about. So I feel like there's so much focus on like really pointless like fights to have.
And that's all coming from the white, basically.
Yeah, right.
You know, black people, they don't care about that. They're like, okay, you know, I mean, in general, they don't care about all the microaggressions. Yeah.
Well, I mean, white
woke warriors that are being offended in their honor.
Yeah, exactly. Like there are white people who care about microaggressions on behalf of black people who don't care about them. Like I think that's silly. Like that's still talking over people. Like, you know, And I feel like if you want to talk about critical race theory, there are definitely like topics that need to be discussed, but I don't really think like white people wearing dreadlocks, for example, is one of them, or like, I don't know, there's like so many really stupid things that people really hone in on, like calling everything blackface, even if it's not actually like I don't know.
Mud mask or,
right, like the mud mask situation.
I think they canceled an episode of the Golden Girls because they were wearing masks or something.
I've heard about that. And I've heard about, there's a movie called Tropic Thunder, which was pretty big back in my day. And it's a very good movie, actually. Like, I mean, it's like stupid humor, but there's also like commentary to it about the Hollywood industry. And Robert Downey Jr. technically does blackface in it because that's the point of the movie, is that it's extremely out of touch and like offensive, and it's supposed to be offensive, but people like are offended for the wrong reasons, if you know what I mean. Like they're like, oh my god, Robert Downey Jr. did blackface, and I'm like, yes but no. Like the point of that character is like making a statement on Hollywood taking away roles from black people and giving them to white people, which is the joke. And there's another character in the movie that is black and is very offended and irritated by it. And like, that's the joke. So it's like, sometimes you have to have provocative imagery and like things happen in movies in order to like make statements and get your point across. And like, that's art, honestly. So I don't know, like there's a lot of stuff like that.
And how do you feel about them canceling things that were appropriate in the time that aren't appropriate now, such as Dr. Seuss and whatnot,
Well, the Dr. Seuss thing I can talk a little bit about because that's one of those like fake outrage things where it's not really that big of a deal, actually. Like most, apparently there's like a few books that are being put out of print, not necessarily just because they're offensive, but also they don't sell anyway. And I think that's fine. Like I don't really care about that, but I do think there are a lot of things that were like appropriate for the time, and now people are very offended by them, and they're like, they won't accept that as an excuse that it's like that it was okay back then, because they're like, just because people did it doesn't mean it was okay. And I'm like, I mean, I guess, but at the same time, like attitudes were so different back then that like, if it wasn't offensive to people at that time, because it's not like there weren't black people in the 90s, like and maybe some of them were offended by some of these things and just didn't talk about it. But like,
well, Dr. Seuss is in the 30s.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know.
That's way back, and like Gone with the Wind and whatnot, they're trying to cancel that.
Yeah, I think the thing about a lot of those like historical things like Gone with the Wind, for example, is if you get rid of those things, like you are getting rid of a piece of history that would have alluded to the culture of that time, which I think is more valuable than like censoring it from everybody. So, and I'm also very, very anti-censorship. Like no matter what it is, like I don't agree with censorship. So,
Why do you not agree with censorship? Is it because of the authoritarianism of it, or?
Partly, yeah. I definitely think censorship is one of those things that goes on the slippery slope towards authoritarianism, which I wouldn't say that about a lot of stuff, but like I showed you that one infographic on Discord where it was like, when you start censoring one side, that side, the extreme part gets, closer and closer to the other side.
Yeah, and then before you know it, you're censored. You're on the right side,
exactly. Well, and I'm already in that side. I'm not like liberal enough, like for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I do have some opinions like this, and so like, yeah, that happens to me where it's like, now I'm the one being censored and I'm not allowed to talk about my views because I don't think this is blackface and I don't think that's racist, like I don't agree with it, and like it's no better than like book burning, which is like more of a right-wing thing, and like I don't think we should get rid of pieces of history just because they're offensive. Like sometimes that's just the way it is,
Yeah.
So, and like art is provocative and sometimes it's offensive, and that's just how it is.
Yeah, well, you and I agree, I think, almost completely on this topic.
Oh yeah, I think so too.
Yeah,
this is part of the reason why I think.
And as far as teaching critical race theory in schools and institutions and corporations and stuff like that, the divisiveness is the main issue for me. I mean, that's what it's going to cause, because, like you said, you're old enough to remember the 90s. I'm old enough to remember the 80s. Mm-hmm. And, people are going to think, oh, the further back you go, the more racist it must have been. It must have been pretty bad in the 80s then, I'm more of an 80s girl, because 70s I was born and I was alive, but I was a child,
Definitely come off as an 80s person.
Yeah. So 80s is my like teenage era or whatever, but we hung out. We didn't care. And people think, oh, you just, you were just unaware of your racism, whatever. We literally didn't care. Like, we never thought of it. I had a couple of black boyfriends, a couple of black girlfriends back in the day. I had the music we listened to. We didn't consider Michael Jackson a black artist or Prince a black artist or whatever. You know, they were just who they were. We're just some of the people that we listened to. We just didn't think about it. You know?
Well, and that's another thing I want to talk about, and I'm sure you'll agree with me on this, but it's the thing is, like, when you say things like that, and when you say, for example, like that you feel colorblind about race, people will take that as an offensive thing as well and say, like,
because you're not giving the full respect to the person's race or whatever. You're not, you know, yeah.
And I think that honestly, like, that's to me really frustrating, because when people say that they're colorblind, like, they mean it in a good, positive way. And for people to like twist that around to be like a negative connotation, to me seems disingenuous and like bad faith, because it's like, you know what they mean. You know, they're not saying that like if they saw something racist happen in front of them, they would be like, whatever, I'm colorblind. Like, they can acknowledge that racist things happen while also saying that they're colorblind, because that just means that when you're talking to black people, you're not consciously going, I am talking to black people. You're just, I'm talking to a person that's equal than myself.
And it was much more like that. It was much easier to be colorblind before they started with all the critical race stuff. Now
I know. I also used to feel the same way.
I'm kind of thinking, are they thinking something about me? Should I be thinking about something? You know, it's like uncomfortable now.
Completely.
They're creating the division, and I feel it in my own life.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had the same exact experiences, because like I said, I grew up around like black neighborhoods. I went to schools that were like 90% black students, and like that alone, like I didn't have an opinion about that at the time. Like, it was just, you know, the situation I was in and the people that I was talking to, and I didn't really care. And it's not saying that doesn't mean you can't be like educated on racial issues or like, you know, issues that face black people, but it means that you don't have to consciously be thinking about the person's race that you're speaking to at all times when you're talking to them. Because like you said, then like now when I'm talking to people who happen to be like black or not white in some capacity, I'm like always constantly sitting there thinking about race theory and like wondering about all these things and hoping I'm not being offensive somehow. And it's way more stressful than before, and it's to the point of like, and I'm not saying that it's like, you know, just because it's stressful that I'm gonna complain about it, but I feel like it also, if anything, makes me single them out more, which I feel like that's more racist than like, you know, just having a normal conversation where we just act like people, you know. Like, I don't know, I don't really like the impact that it's had on like how I view other people and how other people view me and how other people view each other, and like all around it's just become way more divisive.
And imagine how that is in a corporation when you're having to go through this critical race theory training and you're being labeled an oppressor and they're your victim, and then you got to go back to work with them and work one-on-one as a team. It's somehow supposed to strengthen that relationship, you know?
Yeah, I think well, the thing is, there's actually been studies and like charts and stuff that show that race relations are worse now than they were like 10 to 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So, like, it is actually true that is the case. And it's like, it's not because of, you know, the rights. It
started with Obama, really. He was very divisive. I mean, I don't know how much of an Obama supporter you are, but.
Yeah, I personally, I voted for Obama and I don't regret it. And I don't necessarily consider him a divisive president, but I do think that there was a culture emerging around that time, and I don't necessarily attribute it to Obama, but I think it's more to do with a lot of social media, to be honest with you. And that is about the time where I feel like critical race theory started to become like trendy in a way. And I feel like people were talking much more about like really liberal college degrees where they pretty much just talk about stuff like that and like feminism and things like that. And those kinds of like academics were pretty much like going online a lot and like spreading a lot of like sort of academic rhetoric, which is like fine to an extent, but it was getting to the point where it was really overbearing and basically labeling anybody that didn't agree with them like as offensive and privileged and racist and sexist and all these other things. And I feel like that's kind of where it started. And I don't necessarily think Obama had anything to do with it, to be honest, but that's my view. Yeah.
I think he was right in the middle of it.
Yeah, I can't pinpoint anything that I can remember him doing or saying that like gave me that impression, I guess.
All right. Well, I don't, like I said, I didn't do any research. I don't have anything like, you know, next to me to say, here we go. What about the time you said this? But
no, it's fine.
I think he did say some stuff, but yeah, I wasn't really into politics at the time, so.
Right. I think I started to become into politics around that time, mostly because of the recession via the Bush administration was the point where I was like, maybe we should not do those things. But that's pretty much the point where like I was becoming an adult and solidifying my political opinion and stuff. So
yeah, I was busy doing other things at the time.
Yeah, I know. I can imagine why you wouldn't have been that involved in politics at that point. So
yeah. There's something I was about to say, but I kind of got off mental track. So, I know it was pertaining to this subject, but oh well.
Yeah. Okay, well, let me give you another example too with critical race stuff. Like, did you ever watch the Boondocks? Which is not the movie.
Yeah, I know. I'm familiar with the Boondocks. I haven't watched like every episode, but I know who you're talking about.
It's one of my favorite shows, and I've seen every episode. The fourth season is bad because Aaron McGruder wasn't making it anymore. But that show nowadays is like a lot of people find it offensive, like, and it's made by a black guy about his own culture and like his own views on those things. And I remember him trying to kickstart a project recently, but like within the last like decade, and it failed. And I'm pretty sure it's because like this is just like people don't accept those kinds of things anymore. And it's kind of sad because I'm like, you're literally disparaging the creation of a black creator to speak on his behalf, which I think is kind of silly. And I feel like that show is a really good example of like how I personally feel about race relation issues and like pretty much like all of the things, because like the main character is like, you know, liberal, like radical and stuff like that, and like very like revolutionary as far as like black rights are concerned, but at the same time like they're acknowledging a lot of issues within the black community that are not necessarily caused by white people, and you know, a lot of like other kind of roadblocks, and like they really focus on like the important things about like issues with black rights, and not like really frivolous, you know, like who wears their hair a certain color or like shops at certain businesses or whatever, you know, like all that stuff. So that's a good example of like what I want to see happen again in terms of like the conversation about race issues. But yeah.
Do you think this is going to keep getting worse, or you think that pretty soon people are going to be going, wait a minute, I don't want to be going down this road, and it might reverse itself and kind of go back the other way?
Good question. I think it's already getting better personally. Like, I know that's funny to say and it's still a problem, but like way more frequently now when I hear someone say something that is extremely divisive, like I see people disagree with them openly, even people that are not like, you know, conservative or whatever, like other liberals. And that I didn't see like 5 years ago, maybe. Like at that point, like if you said anything against something like that, like you would get dogpiled basically. So I've seen a bit of improvement. I've definitely had a lot more conversations that are more rational than I've had like several years ago. So I think people are starting to like calm down a little bit. And you know, there's like the pendulum theory, right? So it's like when the pendulum swings all the way on one side, it might swing all the way on the other, which I don't think would be a good thing because like that just makes it worse. So I'm really hoping we can get like.
I do kind of see that happening right now. Like you said, that race relations are getting worse.
Yeah.
And it's like it is kind of a pendulum thing because, or maybe a balancing, an equalization kind of thing. You know, like if you push somebody too far one way, they're gonna push back the other way.
Right. That's like a human nature thing. Like the more that you try to force someone to like capitulate, the less likely they're going to. The more that contrarian they're going to be.
Right. So. It's like
it's
like that. Unfortunately, it's kind of like that with trans issues as well these days. There's 100%. Trans acceptance is on the decline. I think it's like gone down 15% since, you know, like in the last decade or something.
I have a lot of opinions.
Because there's a lot of pushing it down your throat kind of thing. You probably have a lot of opinions on that too.
I have a lot of opinions.
Yeah, but I'm just relating it to this whole like if you push this on to people so much, they're going to retaliate and go back the other way. Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing too is like when you're having these conversations with people forget that you need to actually be convincing the person that you're talking to that their point of view is wrong, not just like shaming them into not having it anymore, because that's how you get that kind of like resentment, basically. Like, because if you get someone to maybe stop saying that they think this or that is like bullshit or whatever, then okay, maybe they won't say it anymore, but they're gonna think it, and they might start thinking it more and more strongly in the opposite direction, just because of the fact that they're silenced and they can't talk about it anymore. And that leads to like actual white nationalism and like actual racism, which is something that is on the rise, I think, from the past like decade. Because I mean, maybe it's not, but like I don't remember seeing much about like actual literal Nazis. Like, and I'm not talking about like what liberals call Nazis. I'm talking about people who like are actually Nazis right now, like neo-Nazis and shit. So it's like I don't remember seeing them being like having their own spaces and whatnot like 10 years ago. So that to me is problematic, and I think that is because they were pushed so hard like out of the mainstream that now they feel like accepted in this group, and they're like they can say whatever they want now. So it's like, I don't know, then you get people that are just like feeding into each other about that sort of thing, and it actually becomes racist. So that's my view on that.
Yeah, it's my view on that too.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, basically you can't force people to agree with you. You have to convince them, and if you aren't going to convince them, then like just drop it, I guess, because the more that you try to force them to agree with you, the more they're just going to be contrarian.
Right. Well, I always appreciate that you never try to force anything on me.
Never.
Because most liberals, leftists that I speak to, that's their goal. That's their main goal.
There are more sane ones out there, but I don't know necessarily how populist they are, as opposed to like the ones that are more forceful, honestly, because like
the more forceful ones, they've turned me farther to the right. It's really true. Like, yeah, I feel it, you know, like they're on me. I mean, I had I could give some examples of some people like that I decided to start a Facebook conversation with, like, come on over to my Facebook, let's talk about it, because I do want to talk, I like, well, educate me on this. But they're just so radical with it. I was just like, you know what? I'm more right now than I was before I started talking.
And you're not the first person I've heard say that. And like, I don't necessarily want you to be more right. So, like,
because they proved everything that I thought about the left, the radical left. They were so radical. I was just like, I don't want to be anything like you.
Yeah, I understand, and like that's the thing is like I think that's a negative effect that that they're having on people like you and like anybody else who would be willing to listen, basically, and whom has had experiences that I'm sure you could probably relate to a lot of like issues that the genuine people on the left would want to touch on. So yeah, like I don't know, I've definitely seen them push people further, more radical. I honestly, like, my thing is I mostly blame like social media. Like I feel like I'm an old man. It's like back in my day, teenagers didn't have cell phones all the time. But like honestly, I feel like when smartphones became really mainstream and like everybody had one at that point, that was the point where I noticed like these culture wars really coming up. And it's mostly because like when people are on like the internet and social media, they don't have that like filter that you have with a real person that you're talking to, where you like don't want to actually offend them and hurt their feelings, because A, they might kick your ass, or B, you might make them cry or something, like those kinds of things. Like that doesn't happen online. So people just say whatever the fuck they want, and they just like go at it from the most hostile angle. And like I've seen more and more people call this out, fortunately, but like on Twitter, for example, like I say one thing on Twitter and like people just immediately start in with like insults. And I'm like, I never insult people when I'm arguing with them. I just don't do that, because to me that's like not to insult people, but it's stupid. Like why would I want to insult? Why would I want to be calling them names and like, making them like cussing them out and shit? Like I'm trying to convince them of my point of view.
Yeah.
So but yeah, people will just like immediately start in on the insults, and I'm like, that's not how people talk in the real world. What is wrong with you? Like,
what do you think? These are mostly younger people, or just everyone?
Mostly younger people
learn to communicate this way.
I definitely have seen people who like eventually tell me that they're like 30 or 40 when I think.
Yeah, I know. I've experienced that too. I'm thinking, I'll get a bunch of really crappy comments in my comment section. I'm like, well, that person's probably 14, and I come to find out they're 40. I'm like, wow.
Yeah, so it has happened, but I do think it's more often younger people, because they're the ones that grew up in that culture more. And like it's before the internet was mainstream. Like I was on the internet back when I was like 12, and like nobody had the internet back then. And you're also, I'm sure you remember the time when nobody had the internet.
Yeah.
And But when I was first on the internet and there was barely anybody on there, like it was a totally different landscape. Like it was so completely different. I mean, it was definitely offensive, but like in a fun way. Like it wasn't like seriously offensive. It was more just like jokingly offensive.
Mm-hmm.
And so people would have like, there was still like, conflicts and drama and all that stuff, but most people weren't on the internet at that time. So like a lot of the mainstream like rhetoric that was developing, I guess, culturally, like hadn't reached the internet until I feel like smartphones became mainstream and everybody had one. And then suddenly everybody has access to the internet at all times, and they all have all these new social media websites to post their opinions on. And that's the point where I feel like things really culminated, I guess.
Well, I love technology. I love
Thank you.
I love the internet. Like,
I'm very like the internet was a
I'm
mistake.
all for
but that's
progress. I like to consider myself a progressive.
Yeah.
But yeah, we need to grow into our internet pants
Something like that, yeah.
as a society, because
Yeah.
it's like eating up too much of junk food,
Yeah, I guess it's like, I mean, for one thing, when I was younger and like social media first started to happen, it had a pretty negative reputation overall. Like most people thought of it as being a very poor substitute for actual interaction with people. And nowadays it's like the norm.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I think that it is a bad substitute for actual interactions. Like, I'm not saying it's a bad thing overall, like it has its place, but like when people are using it to replace like normal interactions with people, like that's where we get these really problematic conflicts all the time, I think. So.
Yeah, I'm just not sure what we can do to, it's up to the parents, I think, to teach their kids.
Part of it. Yeah, be respectful to people. But I mean, people who are already adults, whenever this is happening, like, I don't know. I really think
personal responsibility then, yeah.
I'm just gonna, my method is to just be the change that I want to see, and that's why I don't like get really mean to people whenever I'm disagreeing with them online, and like, I just don't engage in that part of it. To me, like, there's no reason to, Pat, you are really fucking hamming it up right now. So,
I like that phrase, be the change that you want to see. My daughter's got a bumper sticker, says that.
Right.
It's a good bumper sticker.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that sentiment. So
yeah,
but I will say, and we can talk about this too, there are some like critical race theory things that have brought to light issues that I do think people needed to be aware about. I just think it's gone too far. But there are things like redlining, which I brought up to you before, and then I can explain what that is more. And like a lot of like workplace discrimination has actually happened and like been unnoticed and things like that. So it's like things weren't perfect back in the 90s. Like I definitely feel like overall race relations were better, but like there were like systemic issues back then that were definitely like, a problem. And there are systemic issues now, but the thing is, when you're talking about systemic issues and you're blaming the general population, like that's kind of defeating the purpose, because the general population isn't actually the system. The system would be more like the government and like the authority figures and whatnot. So like to blame like all regular white citizens for like systemic race issues, to me, is really counterproductive, because those are the kinds of people that you want to be, changing those systemic issues on your behalf, I guess. So like via voting and whatnot. And you're not really going to get them on your side if you are alienating them and accusing them of things that they're not even responsible for, But yeah, so it's like, I definitely want, like, I want some laws to change. Mostly, I would say like the biggest issues that I see facing like Black people. I don't like saying the words people of color, because to me that's literally like an amalgamation, or like that's an anagram of like
colored people,
which is an offensive term. Like, so I will not say that. Nobody will convince me that that's okay. But anyway, so like Black people or non-white people, but more specifically Black people, like the biggest issues that they face are due to like neighborhood redlining, which is basically like.
Is that still happening to this day? You keep talking about redlining, but I thought that was something.
It's illegal, but there are like loopholes that are often exploited, and that's part of the reason why my city is so segregated, and it's not getting better. Like it's not really. There's not much like changing it, and I will say part of it is like people are really against gentrification, whereas gentrification has been there's been studies that have shown that it doesn't actually have that much of a negative impact on neighborhoods. So people who are against that, I don't necessarily agree with. Like, I think that that's one way to actually get rid of the segregation and the redlining. But that aside, there are a lot of it's like illegal, but that doesn't stop people from doing it necessarily. But there are a lot of, like, for example, banks and like people who give out mortgages and whatnot. And if you live in a certain neighborhood, they just won't give you one. And that is what causes people in those neighborhoods to remain in poverty, because they can't ever get a mortgage from that bank. The only ones they can get are from the ones that are in their own area, which means that they're probably going to be staying in that area. And so they can't ever, like, evolve onto, and those are usually like really high interest mortgages as well. So they can't ever like evolve past that to like, buying a house in a nice neighborhood where they have an affordable mortgage, which is something that when people say the word white privilege, that's the kind of thing they should be talking about, even though I don't agree with the term white privilege, just to put that out there. That what the goal should be, and what I think it initially was, is to get some white people who don't know that these are issues to understand that they are issues. So it's like, I may not have that. Well, I probably would still have that problem because I come from low income neighborhoods and I'm like weird, but like normal white people may not have that same issue. And I'm sure you probably know what I mean by this too, because you also grew up in like such a rough situation where it's like, there are multiple kinds of white people. There are white people who have these advantages and white people who don't, because
it's more of a class thing than a skin
color. That's it. You're right. Yeah, it's a class issue. It's classism, and yes, the majority of white people benefit from classism just because of redlining, which was originally started because of actual racism, even though it's evolved to be a lot more like, anybody who lives in like a meth-infested neighborhood is going to have this issue, whether they're white or black.
Right.
But it's just more often black people. And so like, these are the things that you like, in order to get this message across to people, like, instead of being like, you have white privilege and you need to like check it, you should be like, just explaining to them that this is a thing and not blaming them for it, because it's not their fault, like, that's how I see it. And I feel like that's where the division really comes in. And
I believe in class privilege, and I believe in pretty privilege.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Attractiveness privilege. That's a thing. Yep.
But a lot of that other stuff is just kind of a social construct, I guess, whatever you'd say.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's some of it is.
Or I'm a really strong believer in the law of attraction, that sort of thing. Like, what you believe, is you're making your own reality. And if you go around dwelling on, I'm oppressed because of this and that, you're going to see that wherever you look, and you're going to create that as a reality for yourself. So stop considering yourself a victim. Stop looking at everything through this racial lens and this victimization lens, and then this hierarchy of white versus black. Stop looking at it that way. And they're perpetuating this with us, kind of shoving this whole thing down our throats. My husband's walking by, flipping me off, trying to distract me.
As we do.
But this whole race theory stuff is just making more of it, because we're concentrating on it and we're manifesting it.
Well, I think there's what I'm getting at is, I think there's a correct way to teach race theory that is not necessarily how it's being taught right now. And it's really just it's okay to talk about these issues in a way that's not divisive, where, like I said, you're not victimizing people, you're not blaming other people, but you are saying like, okay, yeah, this actually exists in this neighborhood. People have a hard time getting out of this neighborhood because of these discriminatory practices.
But a lot of the times it's a mindset. They're having a problem getting out of the neighborhood because they don't think they can. They think they're oppressed. They don't believe they deserve it. They think
sometimes,
down. It's just like
sometimes it is actually like a systemic issue that is happening in that neighborhood. Like, I'm not saying that you're not right, but there are situations where it's not just because of their attitude.
Well, you might have to overcome certain things, like, your lot in life, like, might not be, everyone's not brought into this life equally, and you may have other things you have to overcome. But, a lot of it you can overcome, like, up in here.
Well, I think in order for these things to change, you do have to take steps that are going to put you that you're going to be disadvantaged while taking. And that's like kind of how any sort of civil rights thing works. Like, you're starting from further back than other people, so you are going to have to take more steps than they will in order to get the change that you want. And that's, you know, like, it's okay to like talk about that, but it's like not my fault that that's the case, you know what I mean? So it's like when people like blame me for it, it's like, well, maybe you are directing this at the wrong person, and instead of like yelling at me for it, just go vote. Like, go vote for the politicians that you think are going to get rid of this issue. Like, that's what I want to see. And like, I know that, and I've told you about this too, but there is such a thing as voter disenfranchisement with low income and like Black communities. And
I want to talk about this. Go ahead
Yeah.
and tell me what you're going to say, because there's some stuff going on right now that, you know, Biden's trying to do all these executive orders and stuff as far as voting goes.
like, Biden is so close to being a Republican. Like, I'm so surprised anybody has an issue with him. But anyway, so yeah, so basically, like, it can be more difficult for Black people to get the right to vote. And then one of the things I was going to actually bring up before, and it links into this as well, but like the prison system is very bad and very racist, and like is actually a big systemic problem in our country. It kind of literally leads to enslavement of like lower classes of people. And I can get all into that too, but like because of that system, it does have a much larger impact on like Black communities. And if you like go to prison or go to jail or get arrested for something like having weed or something like that, and you're Black, like there's a really good chance that it's going to leave such a stain on your record that you won't be able to vote, which I don't think is fair. I think anybody should be able to vote even if they've like done something wrong. And whereas when white people get caught, you know, in like suburbs with weed, there's a much less chance of that happening, and they usually don't really see those ramifications. And that is an example of like actual systemic racism that it's okay to talk about, and I want to educate people about. And so because of things like that, there are a lot of like parts of the voting population that are disenfranchised. The other way that Black voting populations are disenfranchised is just through the hours and like the time in which you can vote. So, you know, voting day is Tuesday, and it's usually like business hours basically. And you don't get paid for getting off work to go vote. You are legally allowed to take off work, although there are some businesses that under the table will like try to coerce you into not doing that, which is also a problem. But just because you're like allowed to go vote doesn't mean you like can take those hours off and like still support your family, especially if you're already living like paycheck to paycheck. So this disenfranchises a lot of lower income people because they can't vote because they have to take off work to go do it, and they can't do that because then they can't feed their families. Whereas people who have more money could do that easily, and it doesn't really affect them. So that really leads to a population of more high class, like higher income people voting and lower income people not being able to. So like that's the kind of thing that I don't like, and that's what prevents a lot of low income neighborhoods from creating systemic change, because they can't vote for it, you know? So I think we should, like, for example, make voting day like a holiday or something, and like everybody gets off.
That's not a bad idea. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But what about voter ID? How do you feel about that? I mean,
well,
you should be able to show your ID. You should have to show ID and prove who you are and all of that in order to vote. And
yeah, I think there should be alternatives, because there are people who are, when you have really low income issues. I can actually give you an example that relates to my life. When I was younger, I was not able to get an ID. And there was a lot of like bureaucracy involved in it, because like the bureaucratic system when it comes to like identification is a nightmare. And it's very like, there was like a catch-22 where it's like, I needed a picture ID in order to get a picture ID, like because I didn't have my birth certificate or like a social security card. And how can I get a picture ID if I can't get a picture ID to get the picture ID, you know? And so that kind of left me in this loop of like not being able to have identification for like the first couple of years of my adult life. I mean, it was like all the way up until I was like 19, until I was actually able to get a picture ID and then use that to get my like license, you know? And the only way that I managed to do it was actually like not even technically legal, but like when I went to college, I was like enrolling in college, and I had I had a tribal ID, but that wasn't good enough. And I had my birth certificate, and I didn't have a social security card at that time because I couldn't get it without a picture ID, which I didn't have. And so I was trying to enroll in college and get a student ID. And they were like, well, you need 2 forms of picture ID, so your tribal ID doesn't count. You also need like another form of picture ID. I'm like, well, I can't get one. And so like, I basically convinced the guy to just go ahead and give me the student ID, which he wasn't supposed to do, but like he pulled some strings, I guess, he just kind of did it anyway. And if it weren't for that, I don't know what I would have done. Like I probably maybe still wouldn't be able to get a picture ID because of that.
You can't order your birth certificate?
I had my birth certificate, but it wasn't enough. I needed 2 forms of picture ID, and I couldn't get the second form of picture ID at all because I needed another form of picture ID to get that one. So now that I had my tribal ID and my student ID, I was able to take those things to get an actual state ID. And that was the only way that I was able to do it.
That Wisconsin thing?
No, this was in Oklahoma. Oklahoma. Wisconsin has the issue too. I mean, I wasn't able to get it in Wisconsin either, but it's definitely not just that state. Like there are a lot of like hoops you have to go through. So there are people who have forms of identification, but maybe not a state ID. So I feel like it should be okay to accept other forms of identification. I'm not saying you should just let anybody walk up and be like, my name's Harry, can I vote? Like, I'm just saying that either they should make it easier to get your state ID, or they should allow you to have alternatives when voting, or both. But, I think it's a middle ground between like, I'm not saying you should just not have anything, obviously, but back when I used to vote, I remember, well, I mean, I still vote, obviously, but back in like the 90s or whatever, you needed like a piece of mail to prove your residence. It was actually probably the early 2000s, but you know what I mean. So it was like, you needed a piece of mail to prove your residence, and then like one thing that proves your ID, like it could be your state ID or like a birth certificate or your passport or something like that. And so I think that there's plenty of ways to prove who you are. And there is an issue, and I'm sure that this is probably what you would have a contention with, is voter fraud. Voter fraud is actually not that big of an issue, but identification fraud is a problem. Whereas people stealing identification from other people to like steal their money and whatnot, like that is a bigger issue now than I think it was like 10 years ago. So that's something that needs to be taken into account. But at the same time, like voter fraud is like such a minute issue. It's like really not a thing that happens. Like it happens, but like on such a small scale.
I thought that it happened like hundreds of thousands of times in this last election.
Well, it didn't.
It didn't? Because that's not what I heard.
I know it's not, but it didn't. That was more of just a disinformation effort to try to undermine the election, which I also have a problem with. The voter fraud in the election was pretty minute. It was actually less than it usually is in most elections because they were being so careful this time because it was like mostly a mail-in election. Although there were instances of voter fraud that Trump supporters committed. But point being that it's really not such a big issue that we need to be super, super strict and like attack that specific problem because it's just like not there. Most people, if they're going to steal your identity, they're not going to use it to go vote. They're going to use it to steal your money. They don't really give a shit about voting. So I'm just saying there should be alternatives for people to present identification to vote and not just one specific kind, like your state ID. And if you don't have that, then I guess go fuck yourself. You can't vote. So especially also like, and if you're a felon, there are a lot of places where you can't vote, and like that should not be a thing as well. So the point being that if you happen to be in that situation and you want to vote to try to give yourself more rights, it's going to be really hard to do it then.
I'm a felon, but I voted. I don't know if I'm running myself off here, but
I know. Yeah, I know that you probably
didn't stop me from voting. I went and voted. They didn't ask.
That is good. That doesn't happen everywhere though. So I think that's probably a state issue. But anyway.
Right. Let's see. Do you want to touch on the gun control?
Yeah, sure. We can talk about that because that's another thing where I think you and I have a lot in common, even though I do have some things where I'm, pro gun control and like all that stuff. But
okay, we might as well just talk about stuff we have in common. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
So what are your views on gun control?
Well, and I've talked to you about this already, but...
Well, you haven't talked to the audience about it,
so
I have not. What you have to say.
Right. So essentially, like, I'm not anti-gun control. I think gun control, like, I don't think people should have access to, like, any kind of gun at any, like, and under any circumstances. But I am not anti-gun ownership. which there's a lot of liberals who are, and there's a lot of liberals who aren't at the same time. Like I know like almost all of my liberal friends are actually like, they're like pro-guns. They're not like, they're pro-gun control as well, but they're pro-gun rights, and you can be both. So that's pretty much my stance on it. Like, I think that there are different kinds of guns. There are guns that are a lot more, big and dangerous, and there are guns that are like, I mean, all guns are dangerous, but there's a difference between like an AK-47 and like a pistol, in terms of like how much
more people are murdered with pistols than they are with AKs.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying that like you can kill more people with an AK-47 than a pistol because it's rapid fire. So if you have a pistol, you can get one person at a time. You know what I mean? Either way, it's bad. I don't want people to die, but I'm just saying that like if you're gonna try to get an AK, I think it should be harder to get than a pistol because of the fact that you can kill more people with it at a time. And I do think that people should have at least some kind of a background check, and like in the same way that I think that you should have at least some kind of identification to vote.
You do know the background checks are already a thing. That's
I know, yeah. And I'm pro that. Like
I seem to think I kind of feel that people that are for gun control, they're like, well, we need to have background checks and this and that. We already do. I don't think they know that.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
You like just walk. They're under the impression you could just walk in anywhere, not even show an ID, just like you're buying a pack of gum, just get a AK or an AR,
To be fair, I happen to know you can easily buy a gun without having a background check because I bought a gun at a flea market once and didn't check anything, and it was down in Oklahoma.
There is like a flea market loophole, but they've really closed that. I was able to buy one years ago that way, but not anymore.
Yeah, there's also like I know people buy them online sometimes, and that's kind of an issue that's hard to crack down on.
Online is another thing. People think you can just buy guns and online, but no, you have to send them. You have to buy it online. They send it to a gun shop, and then
only if you get it legitimately, not through the dark web or something.
This is a topic that my husband's actually very passionate about, and he's over here chiming in. So what do you have to say, babe?
The gun show loophole is bullshit.
The gun show loophole is bullshit. Yeah.
Oh yeah, what is that? Actually, I don't even know about that one.
By the state, you do still have to perform background checks.
Yeah.
Private citizens, you and I do not have to.
Okay. Yeah. When you're trading, like when you're buying guns, you bought guns on Facebook, right? Like Facebook.
No, Facebook is not allowed to sell the firearms.
All right. Well, you've met up with people just all one-on-one. How do you do that?
If you choose to, you can have them fill out the little background check thing. But
just when you just meet up with somebody, I've seen him buy guns just one-on-one in the parking lot, and just from a dude. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's illegal.
It's legal.
Oh, it is legal.
100% legal to do.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
That sounds like a loophole to me. When you're just meeting somebody in the parking lot and you're just
that sounds like something.
Apparently that's legal. So
it's the same. He's selling you a gun right now.
Yeah. And also I guess a lot of people that are for gun control don't want it to be able to, like, grandpa pass their gun down to grandson and stuff like that.
Okay.
They want everything on the books.
Well, I don't disagree with putting it on the books, even if you are going to inherit a gun. And I'm like, they're not going to say like you can't have it, but just let us know that you have it, I guess. And I know that that's something that you were having a problem with as far as like privacy concerns and whatnot, which I think having it on the books is okay. I do agree with you on the thing you were worried about with the like public database thing. Like I don't really see the purpose of that. But it's like at the same time, like if it's like an ornamental gun that is really not meant to be used, I could see you not needing to have documentation for it then, because it's like you're not going to use it, right? So yeah, it's to me it's like very nuanced. There's a lot of situations where I think that we could have a little bit tighter restrictions, and there's situations where it's like I don't really see the need to like change that. And I know I want people to own guns if that's the culture that America's gonna have, which like I told you before, like,
and it is obviously
obviously.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how I feel about the fact that we have such a gun culture. Like on one hand, like it's kind of weird, and I do see that it probably leads to a lot more violence than like other cultures that don't really have that. But on the other hand, guns are cool, so it's like I can't disagree with that, but that's just how I guess America is. We do have a bit more of a
built on the Second Amendment. It's right after the First Amendment. I think equally is important. You really can't have one without the other, in a way.
Yeah, I can see what you mean by that.
Yeah.
I do think people have brought up a good point, which is that when the Second Amendment was made, gun technology was much more primitive, and that should be taken into account when it comes to what
They had some guns. They had some stuff back then. You know, people think that they could not have possibly foreseen the future. No, they were aware that technology was changing, and you know, and
yeah, but that was like literally hundreds of years ago. They couldn't have been aware that we would have like AK-47s now. You know what I mean? I'm just saying, like,
they had some stuff though. They
definitely had some stuff.
No,
I'm not
they
saying
didn't just pack it, you know, like it wasn't a single shot. They had some.
But gun technology has advanced substantially, like since that amendment was made.
My biggest point is, yes, gun technology has advanced, but it's advanced for the bad guys too, and as well as the good guys. And if the bad guys are going to have them, you know, I mean, how can you argue with that argument? Like, the bad guys are going to have guns. Like, you want the bad guys? They're not going to follow the rules. They're not going to turn in their guns. I bet the bad guys want gun control because they're not going to follow the rules. That's why they're criminals, you know?
Well,
that like the ones with those types of guns, and the law-abiding citizens are going to be.
That argument would, let me ask you a question that it seems unrelated, but is in my opinion. Do you think that all drugs should be legal?
Drugs?
Yeah, all of them. Just like heroin, cocaine.
You know what? I've thought about this before, and I can't come to a conclusion because the libertarian in me says it's not the government's business what we do.
Right.
You know? But then of course there's another side to it. It could be the end of society as we know it if we're allowing, you know, everyone to just
I doubt it would
heroin in every grocery store or you know.
Used to be legal. Things like that used to be legal. They actually used to be used as medicine, if anything. Like, you know, you can go to old medical like pharmacies and whatnot, and they have like bottles of like heroin, which is what they used to.
I guess cocaine was in Coca-Cola.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I guess it didn't necessarily destroy society. And I'm not saying like I'm like pro hard drugs or anything, but I'm just, I guess, bringing it up as a perspective on like why some people think that gun control would help. Because I mean, obviously, like, if you don't want all drugs to be legal, which I know you have, you know, on the fence.
I have mixed feelings on that. I really do.
I agree with you, and I understand what you're saying. But there are a lot of conservatives who are like, no drugs for anybody, no weed, no heroin, nothing.
Well, then you might as well make alcohol illegal too. And are you willing to do that?
Yeah, I agree with that. And like, not only that, but it's like, if you think that like banning drugs is going to stop drug problems, then why do you think like why do you think that banning guns will not stop gun issues? You know what I mean?
Exactly. Like, then you're going to have a war on guns.
Right.
You know, next. So they're going to be.
So my point is like,
and I'm sure they already do, but you know, it's going to be people will be jailed for owning a firearm, and you know that there goes your prison industrial complex growing.
I don't think anybody necessarily wants that far. Well, maybe some people do, but like overall, I do think like actually here's a good talking point on this topic, which is I know that you probably don't like a lot of the gun laws in California, but I found out recently that they were actually implemented by Reagan when he was governor or like whatever position, senator, I don't remember, but he was in charge of California and stuff. And he was the one that actually had a lot of the gun control laws in California instituted, and the reason was specifically to attack the Black population so that they would not have them. And that is like, you know, a sense of self-defense for Black populations as well, especially if you live in like a high crime neighborhood, that's your self-defense. So, you know, there is an argument to be made that if you are pro-Black rights and you're anti, you know, like Reagan oppressing Black people specifically, then being pro-gun makes sense actually in that way, because that was something that he took away from. And gun laws are disproportionately unfair to Black populations for the same reasons that I was telling you about voter ID laws being unfair. Like the amount of things that you need to have to, and this is the thing that I was telling you about on Discord or whatever, but like if you're going to agree that like getting enough identification to be able to vote can be problematic for Black people, then it's also true that getting enough identification and background checks to have a gun would be problematic, and that would be like an unfair racial disparity. So especially if you want people to be able to defend themselves in those kinds of neighborhoods. So
Yeah, I'm under the impression that places that have the most gun control have the highest gun crime, and vice versa as well. The least amount of gun control, they have the least amount of
I'm
gun
not sure if
murders.
that's true or not, but I
I think that's statistically true. I've heard a bit about this.
Okay. I haven't heard anything.
Wherever everyone has a gun, people are less likely to attack you. You know,
And I do
because
see
they're
the
afraid.
argument of like if everyone has one, like it's more risky to attack someone if you think most people have guns. So I was telling you about that as well. I agree with you on that. So
Mhm.
I just think that really powerful guns or like people who have shown like a history of being like mentally unstable, like to the point where it could become violent.
Well, that's already a thing.
Right. And I'm just saying that we should
have
get rid of that. That's pretty much all that I think about that. Like I don't even think we really need to change a lot of gun laws. I don't really know if there's any that need to be changed or not. So if somebody else has an opinion about that, then they can tell me. But yeah.
Yeah,
I don't think we should get rid of gun control that we have either. So
right. I think we're fine the way we are, really.
I mean, if we're gonna have a gun culture in America, then that's how it is, I guess. It would be really difficult to change that, I think, at this point. Like our entire country was practically founded on a gun culture.
I think it would be more than difficult. I think that if anything, that's one of the things that would start a civil war if you actually tried to do gun confiscation here in America. Most of us aren't going to go for that on both sides of the aisle. You know, most of us won't go for that. It seems like there's a vocal minority in a lot of these issues, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Like I don't know very many people who want guns to be banned. Like I can't think of anybody that I know that thinks that. So, and obviously most of my friends are liberals, so, you know, but yeah, so.
All right, well, we agree on that. Well, that's nice. We've got a couple of things we agree on here.
Yeah.
Let's see, what can we talk about where we don't agree? I don't know.
What was the other thing that you had on your list?
The immigration thing, yeah. You know, that's in the news a lot lately. So
okay, so let me tell you about the issue with the releasing COVID immigrants thing. I looked into that because I was like, I obviously, as I've expressed to you, COVID is a big deal to me, and so I don't want people to be released into the country that have it. I agree with you on that. The thing is that it was actually Greg Abbott that did that and not Biden. And Biden basically like extended a huge amount of government aid for testing specifically to test all of the immigrants so that they wouldn't be released into the state if they had COVID, or at least be put into like a quarantine facility of some sort. And apparently it wasn't accepted. I don't know if it was actively rejected or he just didn't claim it, but he didn't take it, and he allowed them to be released because he's the one who was in charge of that actually. And then basically said that Biden did it because Biden didn't send the National Guard in to go do it for them instead. So I guess that's what happened according to what I've read. And so I think it's a problem. I just don't think it's something, and I'm not saying that Biden's not at all responsible. Like I think that both of them kind of just were being petty instead of just solving the problem, which is all I care about is the problem gets solved. I don't care who does it or like how they do it, just solve the fucking problem. And I also do think that Greg Abbott complaining about it is very disingenuous because he very clearly doesn't care about COVID issues and COVID restrictions because he's the one who announced that you guys don't have any more COVID mandates anymore, I guess.
Well,
so to me, like, for him to start going on about that to me just seems like disingenuous. So, and if he really cared, then he would have just gone ahead and tested them regardless of whether or not the National Guard was sent in to help him do it.
Well, I heard about that, but I didn't look into all the details like you did. But, you know, I'm sure a lot of the sources, you use a lot of left-wing sources, though, right? I bet if I was to look at it through some right-wing
I actually
point
don't.
of view.
I specifically try not to use left-wing sources for that reason, because I am very much like, I don't want to be biased. And I know I am still anyway, like I will always be biased and you will always be biased, but I try as hard as I can to, like, when I do fact checks, I try to use the most nonpartisan sources that I can find before I like actually say this is what happened. because otherwise I don't feel like I know. I just know like this is what my side said happened. But like yeah, it from what I read, there's really not like the only other side is somebody who does think that Biden should have been the one responsible to do it, in which I'm saying like maybe, but either way somebody should have done it, and like Biden didn't like say to release them without testing them. He said to test them and he sent the money to do it. So, you know, either way, like both, to me, in my view, both of them are responsible in some way. But Biden didn't like say just let him free, it's fine. But like that didn't happen.
Well, otherwise, how do you feel about the immigration issue? Are you a open borders, closed borders, wall, no wall?
Well, I will say this: I am anti-wall, but I'm not necessarily like open borders. Like I'm not really convinced one way or the other on if open borders or closed borders is better. Actually, I want to ask you too, because I want to sort of establish like an axiom here. Do you think that America should accept like the same amount of immigrants as always, more immigrants or less immigrants?
I would say the same as always.
Okay.
Maybe more. Maybe I would be willing to hear the argument for more, or to make it not so much red tape.
That's the thing that I was gonna say is the red tape. So it's like if you, and I personally would agree with the same amount generally, maybe more if that is actually beneficial, which I'm not sure that it is. I've seen things that say that it is in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that the amount of red tape for immigration is absurd, and it actually got substantially worse during the Trump administration, which is the big reason why we had an explosion of like backlog essentially.
It incentivizes sneaking over the border when you have such a huge barrier to legal immigration, to legal entry.
Correct. Not only does it incentivize that, but like the majority of undocumented immigrants are already here and will not leave because they can't get back, you know, because it's become such a process to go through. So that actually prevents us from like, basically like I was watching, I don't know if you've ever heard of this show, but you should watch it if you haven't, but Adam Ruins Everything.
Yeah.
Okay. I love that show. There's a little bit of liberal bias sometimes, so there are a lot of things in it
actually.
there's not as much as you might think. Like they do, but there definitely are some episodes where I was like, I don't know about that, but I do really generally like the show, and I think that it brings up a lot of interesting points. But like basically on that show, I watched one about immigration, which in it he was saying that there used to be basically like a revolving door of immigration where like we would have, you know, people come in and then they would do stuff in the country and then leave and take money back to their families or whatever. And now they're staying in the country specifically because of the border control and like how strict it's gotten, because it's just more convenient to stay than it is to like leave and come back. And so that leads to more of a pile up of illegal immigration as opposed to like, you know, having the same amount as usual. So there is that. And then also like, as far as the wall is concerned, like, I don't really see the benefit of the wall because most people who cross the border don't do so by land anyway. They like fly here with a visa, or they travel here legally with a visa and then just overstay their visa. So
I think that the wall was effective. I mean, I've heard it say that it's not effective. You can go over, you can go under, you can climb it, you can get a tall ladder. But wasn't it statistically found to be like 90% effective? Like it cut down on a lot of.
I didn't see anything about that personally. Like I'd have to like research it, but I haven't seen anything about it being effective. I've only heard.
I'm pretty sure that I remember seeing that the border crossings were way down where the walls were built, and they were built.
We'd have to fact check that one. I guess.
We'd have to fact check that one, but I'm pretty sure I heard that it was very effective.
I've heard that it's the exact opposite. That it's
okay. I guess it depends on what sources.
Yeah, I guess so. So I don't know, like, I would have to, like, try to find a source that I'm sure is unbiased, I guess, which usually means that I have to research what the source is and how they got to their conclusions and all that stuff. So I don't know, but I don't personally see how it, I also think it's way too expensive. And I don't think that it's necessary, because if we had, like, if the amount of immigration that we were accepting previously, like, was fine, then I don't really see what the point of it is. Like, all we have to do to like prevent people from like overstaying their welcome is make it easier for them to become legal immigrants, in my opinion.
Well, I'm coming at it also from the point of view I'm not just talking about your average Joe immigrant. I'm talking about human trafficking, drug trafficking, and all that. That happens. That doesn't usually happen by plane. It doesn't happen from them going in through the legal entry, overstaying their visas. That happens. The wall stops a lot of that.
I mean, I'm sure that the wall probably does stop some more of that, but there are definitely people who human traffic in that way, where they fly over with people with them. Like, that is still a thing. Like, that actually even happens when it comes to not necessarily like American Mexican immigration issues, but like we've had issues of people human trafficking to the Middle East or whatever, and they fly there like legally technically, but they are human trafficking while they're doing it. They're just being really crafty. So I'm not convinced that it prevents that entirely, but
it doesn't prevent it entirely. But it gets down.
I don't know
percentage-wise.
If it gets down, then that might be good, but I still think it's a cost issue, I guess. Like, I think that I'm not convinced that it's effective, I guess. I'm not convinced that it's effective enough to justify how expensive it is.
Well, so. I think you and I might differ a little bit on that one.
Yeah, I know. Like I said,
I think it justifies the cost, and I think it is effective, but not 100%. I'm not like thinking that, whatever.
No, I know you don't think it's 100% effective, but yeah.
But I think it cuts down. I'm really thinking about the human trafficking.
I understand, and I definitely understand like the problem that people have with like, I'm assuming that a lot of people, this is the reason why I don't like it when a lot of liberals are just like, all Trump supporters hate Mexicans, and I'm like, I don't necessarily think it's that. I do think that there is like, the fact of the matter is that there is a huge crime issue in Mexico right now, which is the entire reason why there's so many Mexicans seeking asylum at our borders.
I mean, so you don't want to come in here, you don't want to just open it up and bring all the drug cartels over, like.
Right, and I get that. So, and the other thing too is we actually have more, we allow more immigrants than almost any other first world country, which in my view is a good thing, because that's what America is like founded on, like we had like the Statue of Liberty, like that's the whole bit, and like that's what we're supposed to be.
We're all immigrants, and I think that's one of
the technically part Native American,
but maybe not all of us.
but
many of us,
right, exactly. Most of us are immigrants, and like I think that's good. And the thing is, the more that we allow immigration like legally and like make it possible for people from like lower income countries or countries with higher crime rates, the more that we lead by example as far as like other first world countries, so that they will also maybe be willing to let in more immigration. Because right now, a lot of the places that accept the most immigrants are places like India and China and like stuff like that, I guess, basically. So like, it's, that's great and all, but like, being a patriot like I am, I would rather these people be able to come to America and experience like the development that we have to offer, I guess. Not that those countries aren't, they don't have development, but they also have a lot of more areas that are undeveloped than we do. So, but so it's like, obviously there's a big issue with like violence and danger in Mexico, which is the reason why we have people seeking asylum. So it does make sense that we need some security. Like, I'm not disagreeing with that. So,
do you think that like Biden and like the Democrats motivation for wanting all of this immigration is because they're trying to buy Democrat votes in future elections? Have you ever considered that angle?
Not really, because for one thing, like they don't really need to do that. If they want to get more votes, all they have to do is make it easier for people who are already here to vote, like I mentioned before. And most of the time, like immigrants have a harder time voting than like even our regular citizens that already have a hard time voting do. So I don't really see the benefit of doing that, I guess.
Well, second generation, they're thinking.
Yeah, second generation, sure, but like, I mean, if they're going to, I guess if you're suggesting that they're doing a favor for this generation so that the second generation will vote for them, like, I don't know, don't all politicians like do favors for their demographic so that they'll get votes for their demographic? So I don't
yeah, I guess they're kind of self-centered. They're really thinking more about themselves and their own votes than what's going to happen in the next generation, right?
What do you mean?
Well, I guess seeing things from your point of view, that saying that doesn't really make a lot of sense. I guess most politicians are thinking about their own votes and their own generation than trying to set it up for the next generation.
Yeah. That's basically what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say that's true, like, across the board. Like, I mean, there may be a couple, like, politicians, hopefully maybe, like, some of the non-conventional Democratic politicians, like, you know, the non-DNC ones, that are genuinely trying to improve the state of the country, like, in the long term. But for the most of the time, like, I've noticed that almost all politicians are, like, very much, like, immediate issues that will get votes now and not, like, long-term solutions to things. You know,
so
like,
what do you think the motivation for the Democrats wanting so much immigration?
I don't think the Democrats want so much immigration. I think that they just want to make it easier. Like, that's really all that I've ever seen Democrats trying to do, is make it easier to become a legal immigrant of the country, because it became so difficult, and that's causing more of a backlog.
So they're just doing it out of care for people.
Well, sometimes maybe, and I think also because on a bureaucratic level, it's a nightmare right now, and I think that they think reducing the difficulty will make it less of a bureaucratic nightmare, which means we can send less resources into that, like into immigration law and whatnot, immigration courts, which would be good, because then we can use those resources for other things. And I'm sure there are projects that even Democrats that I don't agree with would rather use those resources for than immigration court. So that's what I think that it is. Like, if in the altruistic interpretation, maybe they just want to make it easier for people to immigrate because they believe in how good this country is. And in the more pragmatic interpretation, maybe they just don't like spending so much money on how expensive it is to make it so difficult for people to immigrate, basically.
Yeah, I do see some sort of a contradiction there when many people on the left think this is such a racist country, and yet they want to allow so many people to come and move here. You know, like, don't you want to protect them from how racist this country is? Don't you want to protect the immigrants? Like, oh, don't come here to this racist country. Why do they want to accept them all in? You know,
I guess I kind of see what you're saying. Like, at first I was like, I don't know. I mean, I think that a lot of them think that part of the racism is the fact that we won't let immigrants in. But I think I also get what you're saying, where like not we as in me personally, but like where a lot of liberals think that like everyone here hates Mexicans. So if you're Mexican, you probably shouldn't come here because everybody's going to hate you. Yeah, I can see that. But I do think that even if that were the case though, like our violence against like non-white people is probably a lot lower than the general amount of violence in Mexico. So it's probably still better even then. But I see what you're saying. Like, it is kind of a funny contradiction. Yeah. Basically, like it may actually be better here, and that might mean that we're not actually that racist against Mexicans.
Right. Well, I lost my train of thought again.
That's okay, it happens.
I had something to say there. But I think I was kind of going off on a slightly different topic, but yeah, about the fact that, you know, that many people on the left think that we're so racist in America and that white people are so bad and have done so many atrocities through the ages or whatever. They don't want to look at how atrocities have been committed in every other country on earth.
Oh yeah, I 100% agree on that. Like, this is one thing that's a big pet peeve of mine, is people claiming that like all white people all over the globe for like as long as the beginning of history have been bad. And I'm like, no, I can give you so many examples of like non-white cultures having the same kind of atrocities. And like, also, by the way, the slave trade was started by other Africans. Like, but the and
thing there's still African slaves to this day in Africa. You know,
absolutely. Also, like, you know,
atrocities being committed all over the globe to this day in other countries.
Well, a really good example of some really bad atrocities is in China. They're destroying like the Uyghur culture. Like, they're basically like re-educating them in concentration camps and like also harvesting their organs and like experimenting with their bodies. Like, it's fucking horrifying. And like, so it's not just white people that do bad things. Everybody, like every culture will always do bad things because it's just human nature, you know, to be like territorial and imperialistic a little bit. So
yeah, so why are we getting such a bad rap? I think that if you compare us to a lot of other cultures from around the world, we're actually a little less barbaric than some of them.
I don't necessarily want to go that far because I feel like that is.
Well, I mean, now though, I mean, America now is less barbaric than a lot of.
I wouldn't say that a lot of other countries are
We don't have a whole group of citizens that we're putting in concentration camps and harvesting their organs.
So here's I guess the way that I would phrase it differently.
Okay, yeah.
I wouldn't say that other races are barbaric. I would say maybe some countries' practices are barbaric, but I wouldn't say like the race itself is barbaric, if that makes sense. So it's like white people aren't.
I'm saying countries. I'm not saying races.
So I'm just saying, like, I wouldn't say white people are less barbaric. I would say that developed first world countries are less barbaric than non-developed countries.
Okay, there you go.
A lot of developed countries happen to have predominantly white populations.
Yeah.
So there is that, and like I definitely understand like the imperialism has been an issue, and a lot of imperialism was committed by the British Empire and then like the Roman Empire, but the Japanese imperialism and Chinese imperialism are extremely well known as well. So it's like it's not like we're the only ones that were imperialistic, or rather you guys, because like I said, I'm technically a Native American, so I don't count myself in that. But and my ancestors that are white are French, because the French people married into the native tribes instead of killing them all. And you know, the French imperialism isn't really a thing, but you get what I'm saying, right? Like, you know, I get that, like, that there was a lot of imperialism committed by white races back then, but there was also imperialism committed by a lot of non-white races as well. So imperialism is bad. White people are bad. That's how I.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm also kind of stunned by how accepting the left is of oppressive cultures, like, you know. I totally
understand where you're going with this. I agree with you.
Like in the Middle East, they're very accepting.
I thought you were going to go with that. So here's the thing: I'm an atheist, and I don't believe in religion. I'm not saying that I don't ever have any like non-skeptical beliefs, because sometimes I do, but I acknowledge that like I don't have any evidence for those things. And in general, like I'm not like, I don't want to tell people what to believe or what to do, but if I had, you know, if everything went the way I wanted it to, people would eventually stop being religious. That's my view on that. I would never tell people to stop being religious, but I kind of just hope everybody comes to like a logical conclusion, I guess, to me. And that's my bias, is just what I'm trying to put out there. That's my bias. So I don't agree with Islam as a religion for a large number of reasons. I don't think it's true. And I don't think that, like, I do think there is a lot of violence advocated by it, but there was a lot of violence advocated by Christianity as well. And it like used to be also an extremely oppressive religion. It's just that it became watered down so much over time that it's no longer like, most people don't actually think you should really stone people, you know, to death anymore. But whereas Islam hasn't necessarily gone through that many filters yet. So it does still have a lot of like blatantly homophobic and blatantly sexist like rhetoric, and that is not only in their holy book like it is in the Christian holy book, but is actively being practiced like by law. And that's the thing that Christianity
doesn't. But you can't talk shit about Muslims, or the left will come after you. Like, what's up with that?
Yeah, I don't agree with that. I think you should be allowed to criticize any religion. And the thing is, it's, in my opinion, more racist for people to assume that if you're criticizing the Muslim religion, that you're criticizing Middle Eastern people, because then you're basically saying that all Middle Eastern people have to be Muslim and only Middle Eastern people are Muslims. Whereas there's a lot of Indians that are Muslim, and there are a lot of like other races that are Muslim. And so me criticizing the Muslim religion is not...
It's not criticizing a race. It's not racist, right? Exactly. And they really, you know, they put those two things together when they shouldn't be.
Which is funny, because ironically, in my opinion, connecting those things intrinsically is racist. So, yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I don't understand why. Like, for example, like, people have been like, oh, you're Islamophobic. And I'm like, yeah, kind of. I kind of am Islamophobic. I think that it's scary that this religion would actually kill me if I was in their country, because, you know, me, I would be killed. So it's like, yeah, I am kind of afraid of that. Not gonna lie.
Yeah.
I don't really want that. So
They
but
throw
that
the
doesn't make me
phobia
racist.
thing around a lot, but that's one area where you could actually use it.
Right.
you know?
Yeah, I'm like, yeah, I am Islamophobic. I'm not racist, but I am Islamophobic. I don't like that religion. So, and I'm not saying that like, I don't like most religions, but like I think that one has a much clearer path of being carried out than Christianity's. Like,
Yeah, they're doing it to this day. They'll stone your ass over there.
that's what I'm saying. If I go to the Middle East, like I'll die.
Yeah.
So, not gonna happen. So, and at least the Christianity is being kept under control by, in my view, I think separation of church and state is good, which is the reason why in America, Christianity doesn't result in like that kind of absolute law, whereas in those Middle Eastern countries where they have like Sharia law and whatnot, like that's the opposite of separation of church and state. Their state is also their religion, so therefore they can carry out whatever the hell they want, which happens to be the stuff in the Quran that says that you should kill people who are gay or like anything like that, So that's just how it is. Like it may not be a comfy thought, but it's true.
Yeah. It keeps happening to me. I get a thought in my head, and then I try to listen to you, and then it's not in my head anymore. Let's see what else is written down here on the old list. I wrote a couple little things here.
Yeah.
Why do leftists think that people on the right are fascists? Can you help explain this to me? Because I'm always, you're on the right, a fascist,
Okay, so let me give it from a couple different points of view. First of all,
Okay.
I don't think that all conservatives are fascists. I think that that's like, it's stupid to categorize the entire right as being fascist. It makes no less. Let me phrase this properly. It makes no more sense to do that than it would to say all liberals are communists. You know what I mean? Like both of those are absurd statements. I do understand the comparison of Trump and his administration to fascism to an extent. I wouldn't say it's full-blown fascism, but I personally, being an anti-Trump person myself, I do think that a lot of the things that he wanted to do and was trying to do were borderline fascist. I think that in general, like a lot of the police institution is somewhat fascist, not completely, but a little bit. But I wouldn't say that I think it's an exaggeration, I guess, is a good way to put it. And to claim that all people on the right is fascist is just like patently absurd. Like I said, it's the same thing as saying all liberals are communists. Like it doesn't make any sense. Like
I
maybe
feel
some
like
of
I'm
them.
the opposite of a fascist because
No, I don't think you're a fascist at all, and I don't think most people on the right would consider themselves. Yeah, because a lot of people on the right want freedom, which is the opposite of fascism.
right.
But I do
Definitely.
think that there are a lot of things that not necessarily the right voters, but more the right politicians want and are doing that are closer to fascism, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So, and just because you're like a Republican doesn't necessarily mean that you are for everything that a lot of Republican politicians are trying to do. For example, like we were talking about before, you're not like all for bailing out corporations and giving them ultimate control, but a lot of Republican politicians are for that. So because they're getting paid to do it. So that is where the fascism is to me. But why the left says that all Republicans are fascists, I think it's just like a catchy buzzword at this point, honestly. Like I said, it's the same reason why a lot of Republicans say that all leftists are socialists,
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah, we do say that.
it's just an other way.
I guess that kind of leads me to another thing that I wrote down here. What do you think are some of the? We can do it on both sides, but what do you think are some of the conceptions or the perceptions or misconceptions that one side has about the other? Like, what would you say some of the perceptions and or misconceptions about the right that the left holds?
Oh, hang on, your camera went down. I think this is a really good question, though. So it's good.
Okay, well, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I just can't see you.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Oh. This? Oh, there I am. I'm back. Okay.
Oh, yeah, I see you now.
All right.
Okay. So, and I have opinions about both sides, like you said. Like, I think there are a lot of misconceptions that my side has against your side, obviously. So the misconceptions that I think the right has against the left would include, obviously, like the first thing is the communism and the socialism thing. Most of us are not like communists, and most of us don't want complete, socialism. We just want some socialist programs and like a safety net, essentially. Most of us still support capitalism to an extent. We just think it's gone too far. I also think that a lot of the time the right thinks that the left is like overly sensitive, like the special snowflake rhetoric, whereas we think you guys are overly sensitive.
I know, that's funny.
It's really
I
easy
didn't
to,
realize that was happening. I was like,
it's really easy to offend a lot of people on the right, to be honest. Like, not you, but a lot of other people on the right. It's pretty easy to offend them, you know what I mean?
yeah.
So, and I'm not saying that like there aren't leftists that aren't overly sensitive, like, my opinion on like special snowflake wokeism and all that stuff. But I do think that both sides obviously have their ideals and don't like their ideals being attacked. So to me, that's not like one side being more sensitive than the other. It's like both sides are sensitive. I do think that there's a definite vocal minority problem on both sides. And on the left, it is a lot of the like ultra woke, like really ridiculous over the top stuff. Like that's not really most of us, especially not in person. Like we're not all like, identifying ourselves as attack helicopters and all this other like super stuff. But
when you hang out with your friends, do you all have to ask what your pronouns are and stuff like that? Is that like a thing?
There are places where that happens, which I don't really like personally, but it doesn't happen as much as people think that it does. It happens way more online. Like online, it's like on Twitter, you have to put your pronouns in your profile page, which I don't do, and I refuse to, and I never will. But I do have, like, when I go to conventions, I do have people sometimes like ask because they just ask everyone, but that's like the minority of people that I meet there. So yeah, it's like we don't all have like, how dare you assume my pronouns? Like that's not necessarily how it is everywhere. It's just like really particular circles that are like that. And I would say, like, I don't know, there's a lot of misconception when it comes to laws in general, like also on both sides, where it's like I think both sides are voting for what they want to be more nuanced, not necessarily like an absolute thing. Even when it comes to things like abortion and like, really hot button issues like that, basically, and like gun control, obviously. So it's like, we're not trying to just like, I don't know, destroy all tradition, for example. Like we just want to
that's what we think.
Be progressive, essentially. So if there's a tradition that's getting in the way of what we would consider to be progressive, then we think it would need to change. But it's not like we think all tradition is bad. Like, for example, traditionally marriage doesn't include gay people, but we think that it should. So therefore, that's why we want to progress in that direction. So, but it doesn't mean we think we should destroy like marriage as an institution or get rid of Christianity or anything like that.
You don't necessarily want to destroy the nuclear family?
No, we don't. Actually, I think that that's a really good example of a misconception. Like, we do not have a problem with the nuclear family. We just think there should be other options, It doesn't work for everybody. And then as far as misconceptions about you guys, I think a lot of them are really obvious to you, probably, that you're all racist and you're all homophobic and you're all transphobic and you're all fascists. And I don't think that, I do think there are some extremists that are definitely those things. Like, I have spoken to people on the right that are racist, like that they say things that are racist.
Yeah, I've heard about these people.
Yeah, like they're there.
They're giving us all a bad name.
Yeah, they're out there. Like I've definitely talked to a few of them, and they're kind of gross. But I feel like they also like they're like the same as the other people on the left are on Twitter. Like they're just starting from the most hostile angle, and so it just happens to come out like that.
They're the vocal minority, right? Because they're so hostile that you hear from them. And
yeah, exactly.
I mean, but I'm really surprised that people on the left really, really think that's me. That I'm admitting to being that because I say I'm conservative.
Yeah, I get, and I understand, and I don't like that because people genuinely don't like that I will talk to conservatives. Like I get judged a lot from my own side because
because you're giving us a platform or you're legitimizing our views or whatever. Yeah.
Right. All I'm trying to do is treat you guys like humans because that's, I think, normal. And I don't agree with like black and white thinking, and I don't agree with like absolutism and things like that. So. And I don't think, I do think that a lot of people on the right are voting for things that are ultimately somewhat racist and homophobic and transphobic, but I don't think that they're doing it because of the fact that they are racist and homophobic and transphobic. I think that they're, in a lot of cases, and I know this sounds condescending and I'm sorry, but in a lot of cases, I think it's just a misinformation issue of like what this particularly entails or what it is that we're trying to get enacted in law.
Some of it's misinformation, and some of it's just I really do believe in the brain differences, like you large said. Amygdalas and this and that,
Yeah, the reactionary.
I just think that there's just different kinds of people, and we're just going to see things in different ways, that we're going to take the same fact and we're going to say, well, I don't see it that way, I mean, you got to be accepting of that. That's to be prejudiced against people with different brains is, it's the wrong way you're going down the wrong path when you start.
That's ableist right there. You can't be prejudiced against people with different brain structures. It's ableist. So.
Right.
Anyway, yeah, it is like there are definitely a lot of situations like where, like I said, it is misinformation. Even people on the left are misinformed about certain laws and what they mean. So it's like it happens on both sides. But I think that's why it's more important to talk to conservative people to explain no, we're not trying to vote for this to happen, we're trying to vote for this to happen, clear up these misconceptions. We're not trying to vote to ban the nuclear family.
A lot of the politicians are really going about it in the wrong way.
Oh, definitely. Politicians suck. We hate politicians.
You'd think that they would be the ones that would be the most reasonable, they'd be, and they're not. They're radical and scary. Yeah. They're gonna scare us, fight and flight, big amygdala people.
That's part of the manipulation.
Change, big change is not always a good thing. Incremental change. Yes.
And that's the thing too, is that's another good misconception is people on the left don't expect these things to happen overnight. The things that we do want to change, the minimum wage increasing, we think it should be incremental. We're not going to tell all businesses tomorrow you have to start paying all your employees $15 an hour because that'll destroy a lot of businesses. And we know that. So we just want it to gradually raise with inflation so that, there can be a bridge to that gap. And that's how it is with a lot of things. And I'm sure that while I really disagree with a lot of Republican policy in terms of politics and what they're trying to enact, I think most of it is more for the benefit of corporations, and I don't like that. Not that the Democrats don't vote for shit that's also beneficial to the corporations, don't get me wrong, because a lot of them are shills as well. But I think there's just sorry, I had something in my tongue. I think there's just a lot of, I guess, fear mongering and whatnot, because that's how you get votes is you fear monger about the other side. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't like the way that things work in the country whenever I have a Republican administration. So that's how I feel about politics as far as why I vote Democrat. But it's not I think that, things are infinitely completely better whenever Democrats are in office too. We need more progressive candidates on both sides, in my opinion. So, yeah. But anyway, I don't know. I kind of am losing my train of thought here. So I guess misconceptions are, you guys are not racist. You just you have, in some cases, you might be misinformed about certain things that are for example, I don't think a lot of Republicans know about how the prison industrial complex is actually provably racist. So I don't think that when people are voting for politicians that are enacting that, they're actively doing it because fuck black people, you know what I mean? It's just something that is and there are a lot of things that I think a lot of Democrats also vote for that they maybe don't know all the connotations to either. So it's yeah, you can't judge people's entire person based on the things that they vote for, I guess, necessarily. People really think you can, but I don't think you can. So
I think a lot of the big difference between the right and the left kind of boils down to how much comfort you have in a bigger government,
Yeah.
How much you want a planned community, or how much you want rugged individualism.
Right. I do see that for sure, because I do, like, I listen to you and I listen to other conservatives, and really the issue always seems to be that you don't want big government. Although I will point out that there are a lot of random contradictions, which I don't think I attribute to you, but like to other Republicans who, for example, don't want gay marriage to be legal, for example. Like, to me, that seems like taking away government, like that's more government control.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's like, there are a lot of,
yeah. Very for anybody should be able to get married if they want to. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and I know that about you, and I know I know a few other conservatives, but I know a lot of conservatives that are genuinely anti-gay marriage, and so it's like, I thought you wanted less government, you know? So there's that, but like...
The vast majority of conservatives are fine with gay marriage. Like, there was some pushback in the beginning, but now that it's here, we're cool. We don't want to change the
Okay,
law.
well, that's good, but yeah, I mean, the pushback in the beginning still is, like, to me, like, I remember that time because I was actually engaged to my fiance for about 6 years. We ended up breaking up for other reasons, and we're still friends now. But like, the reason why we didn't get married during the entire time that we were together is because it was illegal, and people were constantly pushing back. Like, every Republican I knew was like totally against gay marriage, and I was like,
even Democrats.
no, most Democrats weren't. Like, no, most Democrats weren't, not during that period of time. They weren't really anti-gay marriage. Like, they were afraid to be on that platform earlier than that, for sure.
Yeah.
It was not a popular opinion for a bit. But then when there was like the actual push for it, like, the Democrats were the ones that were pushing for it, like, in terms of policy. And Republicans were pushing back. So I was like, that to me didn't seem like freedom, I guess. And there were a few other things, like, you know, like whether or not weed is legal, for example.
Yeah. I'm all for legalization of weed, by the way.
Me too. I don't even smoke, but I still think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I don't smoke, but yeah. I don't drink either, but I don't think we should go into prohibition.
Yeah, and I think it's an important thing to sort of draw comparisons to, like, there are a lot of times that liberals want freedom, and like what we think we're voting for, we consider also to be freedom, because we consider it to be financial freedom if everybody has more money to spend, and we consider it to be freedom if, you know, gay people can get married, and if gay people have the same rights, and if trans people have the same rights, and black people have the same rights, like taking down the prison industrial complex, that to us is freedom. So I want us to like come together on the fact that we all want freedom, right?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of libertarian overlap, for sure, in that.
Yeah. Well, and that's what, like, the term libertarian comes from. Yeah, for sure.
And there's, you know, there's also authoritarian right and authoritarian left.
Yeah, there is. Absolutely.
That's what we need to be against. Yeah,
I don't agree with authoritarianism on the left either, because I feel like that's the side that wants, like, to censor everything that they don't like, basically. And they're not for that. Most liberals are not for that, fortunately. So yeah, like, we want freedom, but we do trust the government a little more than the right does in some areas. Not all areas. That's the important thing.
That's the big thing. I have a very big distrust for the government, and you not so much. And I think that's a lot of the differences. Yeah.
Basically, like, you think that if the government is helping provide a safety net, that you think they're going to use that to essentially exploit us. And I think that if they provide us a safety net, we'll have more control over our personal lives.
Yeah.
So I think that's like the big difference.
That's where, you know, when we did the episode that we did together already, and I said at the end that, you know, that I could see myself coming around a little bit.
Yeah, which I'm glad to hear that, obviously. And
it's because you convinced me that there was more freedom.
Yeah.
And the government needs to work for us, you know.
And I think that is the argument that most liberals, like, are missing when they're like, for one thing, obviously they won't argue with you guys anyway to begin with, like, they just shout you down. But at the same time, I'm like, it's really not that hard to appeal to the common ground that we have, which is personal freedom. And like, all you have to do is explain how these things would provide that. And you can honestly, like, I feel like, I don't want to say like convince all of the conservatives, but at least like come to a middle ground where we can agree on some policies, right? So,
right.
But in actual politics, like in the actual Senate and whatnot, I don't think the issue really is so much about that. It's more just like who's getting paid more money to be benefited by which party. You know what I mean? Like, to me, that one's much more of a, like, I don't trust, like, the Democrats in Senate as much as I trust, like, actual Democrats that I know in real life, if that makes sense. Because I just don't trust politicians. So I do understand the mistrust thing, but I do still think that there are policies that are more beneficial. And like I said, I still want the government to work for us, which is part of the reason why, like, my distrust for them is an issue. It's like, you know, I don't trust them because I don't feel like they are working for us right now. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think a lot of the goals of the government is authoritarianism in the end. They're trying to push it on us very slowly, and that's the whole thing. And I know I don't really want to get into this too much because I think we kind of need to wrap it up because we're going to start losing people, you know.
True.
But I think that's the problem that the right has with the COVID restrictions and stuff. It's very authoritarianism. They're very slowly taking away our rights, and then they're implementing, you know, with the stimulus checks, they're implementing getting us addicted to government money so they can control us. It's a control.
Yeah, I completely disagree with both of those things. Obviously, like, I think that the COVID restrictions are so that we can control the pandemic, which is very important, and I would really like it to go away. So, like, we're gonna have to have some of that in order for it to go away. It's not going to otherwise. And we're gonna need stimulus money because in order to have those restrictions, like, you can't have one without the other. You can't just, like, tell everybody that they have to stay inside and then not give them money to come.
Yeah, for sure. But I think that we're coming to the conclusion now that maybe they can start backing off of the restrictions, allowing us to go back to our regular lives, but they're not wanting that because then they're losing their control, and they're trying to giving us more stimulus money and keep telling us that it's more of a problem than it really is in order to.
Yeah, that's the part where it gets the hot button for me, honestly. Like, I really disagree.
Is this the part you didn't want to discuss?
Yeah, this is the part where I don't want to get into this because I'm very pro COVID restrictions, and I'm very angry that people, like, couldn't handle them for, like, a couple months, because that's all it would have taken.
Just so you know, here in Texas, when they lessened the restrictions, or they said that we can go back to our regular lives if we so choose, we're all still wearing masks.
That's good.
I can't say statistically, like, if statistically it's changed at all, if, like, a certain percentage of people are no longer wearing masks, but I see it across the board everywhere I go.
So here's an example where it doesn't work for my friend lives in Florida, and in Florida they're fucking plague rats right now. They are so badly infected. Like, people there are dying constantly. They have no ICU beds left. And it's because everybody's attitude there is like, I can do whatever I want, and nobody will wear a mask because they can all do whatever they want. And so because of that, they're killing a lot of other people in their communities, which I think is, like, it's not your personal freedom anymore. You're costing other people's lives. So
couldn't people that are vulnerable choose to quarantine themselves, or to, you know?
Well, that's the thing. How long do you want people who are vulnerable to have to quarantine themselves? Because I would love to be able to go out and do stuff like everybody else wants to do, but I can't because my roommate is compromised. So if I go out and I'm not careful, I will catch it and give it to her. So I have to quarantine, but it's not my decision. It's a necessity. And that's not fair to me, because the longer it takes for us to overcome this, the longer I have to stay inside. And the reason why it's taking so long is because people won't, like, quarantine themselves and stop spreading it, basically. So it's like, basically, when other people have the right to spread it, I don't have the right to leave my house. You know what I mean? So it's like, either we all have the same restrictions or none of us do. But, like, if none of us do, then that's, like, it's just not, the only way for that to happen is for there to just not be a pandemic, because like, a choice between killing my roommate and, you know, not killing my roommate isn't a choice, basically. So to me, it's like, it's not like, I hate that people are saying, like, well, if you're afraid of catching it, then you just stay inside. And I'm like, I don't want to stay inside for 2 years. I want to be able to go back to normal, and we can't, because people aren't, like, allowing that to happen, because they're fighting against the restrictions so much. So yeah, that's why it's kind of a hot button for me.
Okay, I understand your point of view. I'm not going to argue with you. Yeah. I totally see your side.
Yeah.
All right. I think, let me see if there's anything else on here that I'm just going to be, oh man, I really should have said that.
What was it? You can say it now.
Covered most of the little things on this little list I got here. So
Yeah.
yeah, I want to kind of wrap it up because people only have so long of an attention.
Attention span. Yeah. We have the ADD.
All right. Well, anything you want to plug? I'm going to go ahead and put a link to your channel underneath. Are you working on some new project right now?
I'm still working on the Trisha Paytas video. I just have been struggling on a technological level, but I'm gonna get it done eventually. And I do have my Etsy store, I guess. So if you want to link to that, I can.
Yeah, I'll link your Etsy store. And speaking of Etsy store, at
And
Etsy
you
store
have
too.
yours.
So I'm actually you will have already seen by the time you get to this point, you will have already seen me plug my Etsy store because I'm going to put it like a commercial in the beginning, But
I was gonna tell you that you need to do that on your videos. So
yeah, I'm going to start doing that. So there's going to be you will have already seen something.
Yeah, so let me plug both of them. So Mimsy makes amazing doll houses that are all like handcrafted and they're really elaborate. And I make some jewelry and some like hand-bound journals and artwork and stuff like that.
Yeah, I totally checked out your store. I looked at everything the other day, so it's awesome. Go check it out.
Thank you.
All right.
It's been fun talking to you.
It's been fun talking to you too, and we'll talk again soon.
All right.
All
Take
right.
care.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.